big show tonight with the Florida Tennis Podcast. I have to confess, I'm a very lucky man because Steve Flink, Hall of Fame tennis historian, has chosen to do the show a second time. Steve, thank you so much for being back on the show. I was going to call it Second Serve, but then I thought it could be another show, that it'll be Third Serve, plus we're doing a Wimbledon preview, but we'll call it Second Serve Wimbledon preview. How you doing, Steve Flink?
Good, Adam. It's great to be back with you again. Looking forward to this discussion.
Well, I am grateful, and you're going to have to bear with me because I know I did your full intro last time, but I got to do it again, so bear with me. Hall of Fame tennis journalist, World Tennis Magazine with Gladys Helbin. Now, Tennis Week, was that with Gene Scott, by the way?
Yes.
I'm asking you questions during the intro. Okay. Okay. Broadcaster, including the Tennis Channel. I said tennis historian, tennis statistician. Author of books, including the definitive book I consider on Pete Sampras, Greatness Revisited. And I don't have my book in front of me, but I did want everybody to see. Anybody out there, if you want to read the greatest book on greatness on Pete Sampras, read Greatness Revisited. I think my copy is sealed up at a special place because you wrote an inscription and everything, and I don't want to touch it, but thank you for that. We are also going to talk about the greatest tennis matches of the 20th century, your book, which is just anybody out there. This is, you cannot have a tennis library and not have this book. Mine is inscribed just to Adam. You know your tennis. And when Steve Flink says that, if anybody says I don't know my tennis, I just break out this book. I carry it everywhere. So thank you. Thank you, Steve. This is a 2012 book. Everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit about this book. Inducted into the Tennis Hall of Fame in 2017 as a contributor. You're a consultant for the International Tennis Hall of Fame, which is nice, and a member of the nominating committee. Now, as I did last time, one of the greatest introductions of Steve Flink is from a wonderful player by the name of Chris Everett, Hall of Famer, just probably the greatest player to come out of Florida, a legend. This is what she had to say about Steve Flink. Steve Flink is the right person to take on the task of selecting the best matches of all time. He knows the game of tennis as well as anybody. He is a good journalist, but he also has a player's mind, a tennis player's mind, I should say. Steve knew my results and matches better than I did. All through my career in the 70s and 80s, it caused much laughter between us. When I would be asked a question about my record at a press conference, I would always look over to Steve. I wish I had been at some of these. And he would have the answers. In many cases, I would inaccurately recall an important detail about a match, and Steve would interrupt me to set the record straight. I've always admired Steve's style of writing for its fairness and accuracy. We have seen the big matches in our lives the same way. He has never written an article about the U.S. Open or any other major tournament that failed to capture the essence of a match. We have always been on the same page about tennis. His fairness is a real strength in his reporting. It seems to me that many writers do not describe what really happens on the court. Steve characteristically gets deep inside the matches and reports them as well as anyone in the field. I think the readers of the book will agree with me. Chris Everett, Boca Raton, Florida, February 2012. Now, as a special bonus, Steve, I thought we're going to show some memorabilia. So we're going to be we're talking about Wimbledon. This is one of my favorite Wimbledon covers. And it is encapsulated. So just so you know, Steve, they encapsulate, a company encapsulates some of the magazines, including, used to be just comic books, but now they do magazines. This is a Sports Illustrated. It's rated a 7.0. You'd like to be closer to a 10.0, but I love the cover. And the other important thing is, for all those collectors out there, it is a newsstand edition. The subscription editions were much more plentiful. So you always want to try to go for a newsstand edition. A little more info, Steve, than you may wanted to know. But
where did you find it?
CGC magazines. First of all, you can actually take this magazine, buy a copy of it, and send it into CGC, and they will encapsulate it. And then they're available on auctions or websites or eBay. But I happen to have always loved this cover. Jim Martz, your friend, my mentor, had a copy of this cover in his above his desk, and it was signed to Jim by both Jimmy Connors and Chris Evert. They both loved him. Who didn't love Jim? So anyway.
Well, yeah, obviously that was an extraordinary Wimbledon to have them both come in there and win it for the first time. And Chrissy did not expect to win it that year because at that point, in her mind, Billie Jean and Yvonne were still better grass court players, but they both lost in the quarters. It cleared the way. She swept through that field after a scare against Leslie Hunt early on, going 11-9 in the third. And then Jimmy, of course, he had a tough 5-setter against Kodesh, but eventually won Rosewall 1-1 and 4 in the final. So they were called the Lovebird Double at the time, as you know, and because they were engaged to be married. And Sports Illustrated had no choice but to put them on the cover. Had they not, tennis fans would never have forgiven them.
It's such a special cover. And Steve, I can't thank you enough for regaling our audience as to the specifics behind this. Yes, they were a couple at the time. For a couple to win the match, and it's just an iconic photo. You know, back in the day, they would be at Holiday Park with Jimmy Everett, and they were friends with people like Dino Martin and Dean Martin's son, and they would play backgammon. I've kind of studied that a little bit. It's almost like a little tennis brat pack. You know, they would hang out, they would play backgammon. It was much different. You know, you touched on this on our last show about the difference of access to people. You could probably walk into Holiday Park and go into the lounge and you'd see Jimmy and Chris, maybe Dino Martin, you know, people hanging around playing backgammon. It's inconceivable today. As you said with that Borg story, it's like inconceivable that could happen now, right?
Yeah, no, more than inconceivable, impossible. So that's why I'm so grateful that I came along at that time, because you're putting up that issue from '74 Wimbledon. Yeah. And it was really only weeks after that I started to work for World Tennis Magazine. I had interviewed Chrissy the year before at the French Open, and they published that one. That was my first piece published in tennis. And then I interviewed her again after this Wimbledon in '74. Did another one, which they published. And at that point, the editor said to me, what are you doing right now? We're moving offices from Houston to New York. Would you like to work full time for the magazine? Thought I was dreaming. And I immediately said, of course. And so that brings back vivid memories, looking at that cover and recollecting that time in my life and theirs.
You know, there is something about photos. I've gotten to know Art Seitz, who's a very famous tennis photographer for Florida Tennis, and he has a knack for a photo. He's got an incredible photo he took of Arthur Ashe with kind of some sweat coming down his face. He's got a picture of Borg with a big thing of ice on him.
He did that for World. Yeah, he got that.
So you know.
Yeah.
And there are something, I mean, we were talking just before we started, you were listening to a Yankee game on the radio, and that evokes memories of listening to the radio. But photos, they're very iconic. I have a lot of black and white tennis photos. You know, there were wire photos that ultimately got sold off, and you could look at these photos like a photo of a young Gardner Malloy, you know, at University of Miami. It's incredible. So I'm really glad that this photo evoked those memories for you. So that's
and let me just add one thing regarding Art Seitz, one of the great tennis photographers we've ever had. And Art worked, he was indefatigable. I mean, he just would chase down any conceivable kind of photo on and off the court. Sometimes that meant aggravating people, unavoidable. But what came out of that, the product of it all, I think a lot of the people that at the time were annoyed with him really appreciated it later on when they saw the quality of the work and they understood the significance of those photos.
Yeah, I am lucky enough to be on an email list where he sends. Oh, you are too. There.
Yeah.
And you know, some of the photos are just unbelievable. And especially, he didn't just take a photo of someone standing there. He thought about it. He composed it, whether it's Bud Collins and Chris Evert wearing a bread hat at the French Open. I love the photos. And recently he wasn't doing well health-wise, and Chris Evert went to visit him. And I thought, you know, she's had her share of issues and health issues, and that told me something about Chris Evert. I mean, to actually take the time And God knows how busy her schedule must be.
No, it was terrific. Terrific of her. Very generous.
Yeah.
A lot of generosity of spirit from her end, and absolutely commendable and well deserved on his end. I think that's all most of us felt. It was the right thing for her to do, and a great thing for her to do, and a gesture that he appreciated immensely.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. So the goal, or what I hope to do, we're going to get right into a Wimbledon preview, but something happened that kind of sidetracked me a little bit. It's called the French Open. We had a final, which I've heard you talk about at length, that in the updated version of this book, which I hope comes out soon at some point, because you got to update this, Steve, and I can't wait for another signed copy of my updated version. But there was a match between Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz that took place that probably has to go into this book. I would think it's got to be one of the greatest matches. So much subtext to it about the 1 and 2 players and Jannik coming in off of a suspension, and it's one of those transcendent matches. I'm not going to do it justice, but Steve, can you do it justice? Can you talk a bit about that match? A big topic, but just some key points.
I feel like I've been talking about it ever since.
Right.
It's inescapable, but I don't tire of talking about it because it was, you set the scene well. It was the top 2 players in the world. I mean, and yes, when the next edition of this book comes out, it will absolutely be in there. But here were these 2 guys, and as you mentioned, Sinner had been suspended. Alcaraz, who had won the French and Wimbledon back-to-back last year to lift his total of majors to 4, had lost early at the U.S. Open and had been beaten by Djokovic in the quarters of the Australian. So he was a little extra determined to get back on the board at the majors. And Sinner, who won the U.S. Open and the Australian Open, he won both of those tournaments, was very eager after suspension and after losing to Alcaraz in the Italian Open final in Rome to reassert himself and to just to remind everybody why he's ranked number 1 in the world. Plus, he'd lost to Carlos 4 times in a row coming in, which was another thing that he wanted to remedy. So they both had so much incentive to win this match, and it's becoming just a great rivalry in its own right. It's not like they haven't had, Adam, a number of blockbusters, including their quarterfinal from the 2022 U.S. Open, which was Carlos's first major triumph, where he beat Jannik in the quarterfinals in another marathon, saving a match point in that match in the 4th set and winning it in 5. And that was just a dazzling encounter and exceedingly well played on both sides of the net. And then they've just kept going from there. So Sinner at one time had led the rivalry 4-3. Carlos, as I mentioned, wins the last 4. So there's so much at stake in this contest at Roland Garros. And we knew it would be great because if that's the case almost every time they step on the court against each other. But you could not write this script in the sense that Sinner comes from a breakdown to go up a set and 5-2, and he looks like he's in total command. And Carlos makes a move and breaks back in the second and makes it tense, but Sinner wins that in a tiebreak. So now we know we're guaranteed 4 sets. That was ideal for the fans that they split sets. Sure. And then Sinner, he had his chances in the 3rd. He had the early break. He didn't consolidate it, and the next thing you know, he's down a break, but he got it back on serve. He's serving at 4-5 for 5-all, and you think again, maybe this will end in straight. And Carlos jumps on him and gets the break there. So now, okay, it's 2-1. And by the way, excuse me, I just said something silly. We had not split sets. I don't know why I said that. Sinner had salvaged the 2nd set when it looked like Carlos might take it away. So Sinner's up 2 sets. Then he loses the 3rd set. Now now we're guaranteed 4. It had looked for a while like we might get a split set. We did not get it because Sinner rose to the occasion and played a really good 2nd set tiebreak. So, but Carlos, again, it seems like you cannot discourage him. There are days when you can. There are days when he knows he doesn't have it. And that usually tends to happen against lesser opponents. Not that he's disrespectful of them, but
sure.
just days when he's uninspired. David Goffin in Miami is an example. That's not a player he should lose to now, but he did. He can have those days, but they rarely happen. They don't happen in major finals. So Sinner, who was close to sealing it in the third set, serving for 5-0, loses it. We go to the fourth, and then of course that's where the match. That's where the match really became. It left the realm of something great and memorable and gripping to almost surreal. Ineffable is the word I'd use. You cannot even describe. So we go to the fourth set. Sinner had this incredible spree in the fourth set of winning 15 out of 16 points. He was playing probably his best tennis of the match that took him all the way to 5-3 and love 40 on Carlos's serve triple match point. And you had to believe that with that many opportunities on clay and the way he'd been returning, that he was going to get one of those. And it didn't happen. You know, Carlos forces him into an error on the first match point. Then Sinner misses a backhand return. He tried to hit a backhand second serve return. He tried to be very aggressive. Took it early, hit it long. And then on the third one, Carlos hit a looping shot down the middle, deep down the middle, and Jannik, uncharacteristically, netted a high forehand. He didn't give himself enough margin over the net. And then Carlos, again, this is what makes him so great, is you give him a reprieve like that. You let him off the hook like that. Suddenly it's ace serve. It's ace and then a winner, and he's held. So Sinner had to go to that changeover. He's still about to serve for the match, but he's in a bit of a state of shock, I would say.
Yeah.
Because you're sitting at the changeover, Adam, and you can't believe that you're still playing. I mean, moments before you were triple match point, and he didn't take it for granted, but he obviously was stunned and a bit deflated not to have closed it out on Alcaraz's serve and saved himself the trouble of serving it out. So sure enough, he didn't serve it out. He didn't play a terribly good game, but Carlos, where Carlos was so terrific is, as you know, Adam, his instincts are normally to be adventuresome, to go for the gallery-pleasing shot is how I would put it. A GPS, gallery-pleasing shot.
Love it.
That's Carlos. That's Carlos. And but he resisted that impulse in those big games in the five from love 40 at 3-5, and then again when Sinner served for the match. He didn't try to do anything too fancy. He sensed that maybe Sinner might be a bit tight, and that this was not the time to be going for spectacular winners. It was the time to be disciplined and somewhat cautious. And that's how he played that 5-4 game. And Sinner helped him out a bit at the start and the end of that game with forehand errors. And partly brought about by Carlos's, again, giving the ball a little bit of air, heavy topspin down the middle, make him think a bit. And he did, and he gets the break back. And then that set goes to a tie break, which, again, this is where you have to keep patting each player on the back at it, because here's the poor Sinner is stunned about not breaking when he had Carlos at 3-5, love 40, triple match point, disappointed by not serving the match out. But then at 5-6, he didn't fall apart. He served his way into the tiebreak, and he won the first 2 points of the tiebreak. And you thought maybe it's the opportunities there again. Well, Carlos was just magnificent the rest of that tiebreak. Couple of aces, couple of winners. He played every point almost perfectly. I mean, Sinner did very little wrong in the rest of that tiebreak, but Carlos took over. So now we're into the fifth, and at the beginning of the fifth, again, you saw Sinner get broken, which was not shocking in the first game because he'd been hit with so much in the latter stages of the fourth, so many devastating blows to his psyche. And so when he lost his serve in the first game of the fifth, he looked a bit wobbly with his legs as he was walking. You worried a bit that he was either hurting or maybe cramps were coming on. Something didn't look right, but he quickly got over that. And although Carlos kept holding all the way up to a 5-3, Sinner was still, he was still playing well. He was competing. He was trying. He had one early chance to break back, but he couldn't take advantage of it. But we're at 5-3. And when Carlos serves his way to 5-3, I'm thinking to myself, it's over. It's done. Sinner had his chance, and he's not going to get another one. So what happens? Sinner plays a very good service game at 3-5 in the fifth, and then he produced his magic in the 10th game to break Carlos and get back to 5-all. And the key point was that Carlos had hit a drop shot, which had been working very well. He'd missed some drop shots, but those that he connected with, those that he executed well, were almost impossible for Sinner to run down. But Sinner made an extra effort at 15:30 to get to this drop shot and somehow scraped the ball back. It was what I would call almost an accidental drop shot winner of his own. But he caught Carlos completely frozen and off guard. Carlos didn't think he was going to reach that ball, and he did. And it was very uplifting for Sinner, who broke him on the next point. Now we're at 5-all, and now everybody is thinking, how in the world has this happened? We thought Carlos had control, and now Sinner is striking back. That's what made them both so gallant. They both competed so honorably throughout the match, and there was so much resistance and resilience on both sides of the net. But even at 5-all, Sinner at 40-15, it took him 4 game points. Looked like an easy hold at 40-15. Carlos battled back, but Sinner holds with a forehand down the line winner. So now Carlos, after all he's been through, and after coming from triple match point down in the 4th set, is serving to stay in the match at 5-6 in the 5th, having already served for the match. Now he's serving to stay in the match, and he's down 15-30. And once again, you think Sinner this might be his chance to run the match out, but he missed a relatively easy forehand that kind of shook him a bit, because he just wouldn't normally miss that shot. He made a decent return. Carlos went down the line to his forehand, but not anywhere near the sideline. It was closer to the middle of the court where it landed. And Sinner just was trying to hit a pretty routine cross-court forehand without going for too much, but it got away from him. He sprayed it long. And so that was really his last big chance, because had he won that point, he could have been back at double match point. Now Carlos made this incredible stab off his forehand, and then he won the next point with a winner. We go into the tiebreak thinking maybe this super tiebreak will be super.
Super tiebreak, 1st to 10.
Yeah, 1st to 10. And we figured that gave us even a greater chance of something close, given how everything that had transpired. Well, Carlos just went on a spree. There was nothing Sinner could have done. You can't be critical of anything. I am critical, as I alluded to, with the match points and other moments. But that last tiebreak was just, it was Carlos playing almost unconsciously, but in a way that benefited him, meaning that he went for his shots. He didn't hold back. Everything was clicking. Everything was working. And he stuck with, again, as he'd stuck earlier in those tight situations with a more conservative game plan and getting balls back and looping them. Now it was like, okay, I've got it. I feel it now. I feel it. And I'm not going to miss. And I know I can go for these shots, and I know I can make them. And it was just a brilliant display. And next thing, he's won the first 7 points of that breaker, and he eventually won it 10-2 with one more beautiful winner, forehand pass down the line. So that, to me, was the only disappointing part of the match, was that 5th set breaker. I wish it could have been closer, but it wasn't a question that it fell apart because one player made a bundle of errors. That Sinner might have made one unforced error in that old tiebreak. It was really Alcaraz's sheer brilliance and creativity and greatness under pressure. So to me, I wanted to hit those key points. I hope that wasn't too long a summation, but I believe that it goes down easily in my book. It'll go in the book. I don't know where I'll eventually rank it by the time I do the next edition, but right now, just looking at open era Grand Slam finals, I put it 4th, because the only ones I put above it are Nadal and Federer at Wimbledon, the epic in 08, which was a breakthrough first Wimbledon title for Rafa, 9-7 in the 5th after being up 2 sets and after having 2 match points in the 4-set tiebreak. And now every set was 2-6-4 sets for Rafa, 2 tiebreakers for Roger, and 9-7 in the 5th to Nadal. So you couldn't really have asked for higher quality in any of those sets. And they were playing on a pretty lousy day, by the way. That's not talked about enough. It was cold. It was breezy. It was cold. It was just not pleasant conditions. But they just played a whale of a match, both of them. Very gallant comeback from Federer, and outstanding mental toughness from Rafa to withstand Federer's comeback. So that's one. The Borg McEnroe 1980 is second on my list, because Obviously, that's another case of 1 and 2 in the world, as obviously Rafa and Roger were. And one more word about Rafa Roger. Keep in mind, that was the 3rd year in a row that they were meeting in the finals of Wimbledon, having already met 3 years in a row in the finals of the French. There's never been anything like that. 3 straight years where the same 2 players meet in the finals of both the French and Wimbledon. And Nadal had won all of those French finals over Roger. But Roger had won the first 2 Wimbledon finals over Rafa, and now Rafa finally gets his reward with a memorable title run. So that's with Borg McEnroe, the 2 best in the world again, the classic clash of styles, the taciturn Swede against the volatile New Yorker, all of these contrasts, and McEnroe, the natural grass court player, but Borg amazingly going for his 5th in a row. So he had done such an incredible job of taking what was essentially a clay court style of play and all that heavy topspin and just not missing for minutes on, seemed like hours on end. And going to Wimbledon, beefing up his serve, learning to slice the backhand, let go on the 2-hander and slice these backhands down the middle and come in. He made serious adjustments in his game. And so here he was going for his 5th in a row. McEnroe, of course, had made his debut at Wimbledon 3 years earlier, got to the semis, amazing run for him as an 18-year-old. And now, he picked up a lot of experience, and by now he's the U.S. Open champion. He'd won the 79 U.S. Open. And the amazing thing about that match, to encapsulate it, Adam, is that it was 2-1 for Borg. He'd lost the first 6-1, but come back, serving for the match at 5-4 in the 4th, 40-15 double match point. So that match could easily have ended up 1-6, 7-5 against 6-3, 6-4. A nice win for Borg in 4 sets, and that's what seemed poised to happen. But McEnroe passes him with a backhand, a pinpoint backhand passing shot, and then a swing volley winner. And the next thing you know, he's broken Borg, who's, again, a bit stunned, as I described with Sinner, too. Those moments, you're not prepared for them. You think you're ready to close out this contest. The beauty of that happening is that they went into a tiebreaker, and then that was the most famous tiebreak the game has ever had. And it was an 18-16 tiebreak, which went to McEnroe, who saved 5 more match points in the tiebreak, having saved the 2 that I described at 5-4 on Borg's serve. So 7 altogether. They go into the 5th set, and Borg's down immediately, love 30, but he got out of the love 30 and only lost 1 more point on his serve the rest of the way, wins it 8-6 in the 5th. So to me, that one, you couldn't leave that one out for so many reasons. Sure. Special rivalry, which ended up 7-7. They also went on. They had an interesting run, similar to Rafa and Roger, a bit different though, where they played that Wimbledon final in '80, then had a 5-set final at the U.S. Open, won by McEnroe later that summer, and then the next year, McEnroe beat Borg in both the Wimbledon and U.S. Open finals. So they had 2 years in a row of supremacy at the 2 biggest tournaments. And but sadly for Borg, that Wimbledon final was the only one of the 4 that he won because he lost to John in New York in '80, and then he lost both in '81. And then he left the game. So if only he could have not gotten so discouraged about his plight against McEnroe. And McEnroe didn't like it either. So I've got those in there. Then I have to have the only other one I have in the Open era and Grand Slam finals above this Sinner Alcaraz match is the Federer Djokovic 2019 Wimbledon final, which you could argue that there was some fluctuating quality because there were a couple of sets that Novak played that were not his very best, that he lost in the 2nd and 4 sets, but he won all 3 of his sets in breakers. And it was historic because here are these 2 all-time greats, and they play a tiebreak, not at 6-all. Wimbledon didn't want a 6-all tiebreaker. They finally agreed to a tiebreak in the final set, which they never used to do. This was a first for them, to agreeing to the tiebreak in the 5th or the 3rd set for women. And what do you know? At 12-all, we get this tiebreak. And it was confusing enough. I'll tell you a funny story. Okay, so sure. Djokovic, who saves the 2 match points at 7-8 in the 5th, 8-7. Roger serving 8-7, 40-15, and Djokovic broke him there and eventually wins it in this tiebreak at 12-all comfortably, 7-3. But John Newcomb was watching the match with Rod Laver and on the 50th anniversary of their Wimbledon final, which Laver won in '69, on his way to the Grand Slam. And Newcomb went after match point for Djokovic, and he's walking up to the net to shake hands, was stunned because he thought they were going to be playing the super tiebreak, which Australia was now doing. He was confused in his mind, and I love that story when he told it to me. I thought, oh my God, yeah, I can see why he thought it. But Wimbledon, no, Wimbledon at that point. Now, of course, they've all agreed on this now, but at that point they hadn't. And Wimbledon's compromise was, no, we're not going to do a final set tiebreak at 6-all. We'll do it at 12-all, but we'll stick with the traditional 1st to 7 winning by 2. And Newcomb was caught off guard by that. But anyway, I just thought that match, the historic implications and some of the tennis, the dizzying heights it reached when both were at their best. And there was a lot of that in the 5th set, especially in the latter stages of the 5th, from Djokovic saving the match points right till Djokovic saving match break points at 11-all. I mean, there was so much that went on in that 5th. Djokovic had led it 4-2. There were just a lot of twists and turns, fluctuations and fortunes, and these two guys pushing each other to the hilt, and Federer trying to win it at 37 and trying for the first time ever to beat Nadal. And he'd beaten Nadal in the semis. He wanted to beat Rafa and Novak back to back in a major. Had never done that, and would have been an incredible achievement for him at that age. But Djokovic denied him that and eventually won the match. And it was a very big match for Djokovic on the way to eventually winning the Grand Slam race over Nadal and Federer. Because at this point, Roger had his 20, but Novak was at 15. So that would have been a big blow to lose that. And Roger goes to 21. He stays at 15. Instead, he goes to 16. And it was a big step, I think, in terms, it just had real importance, I think, in his mind, to keep him going, keep him believing that he could eventually surpass Rafa and Roger. That would have been a big blow at that time, to lose to Roger and stay at 15 majors. So but those are the only 3 I put above this one. So I do consider this the best French Open final ever. And wow. I just think the quality was awfully good all the way through. I mean, I think you can argue a bit, Adam, with Alcaraz's level for a set and a half. Maybe. I mean, I thought from up a break in the first to going down 5-2 in the second, he was a little bit at bay, a little bit confused on how to confront Sinner, who was just, coaxing a lot of errors from him, and not dictating with overwhelming power, but doing it with depth and control and not missing hardly a ball and serving well. And he had Carlos a bit confused for a set and a half. But then from that point on, from 5-2 in the second to Sinner winning that set in a tie break to go up 2 sets, and then right on through all the passages we've talked about already, just astounding quality from both, and the ability to keep coming back at each other and keep demanding more of each other. And it's a Grand Slam final, and it's the 2 best players in the world. To me, that's the common thread. Most of the matches in my book, and to me, most of the greatest matches should be ideally and are between number 1 and number 2, or maybe in rare cases 1 and 3. But ideally, it's the 2 best players. In most cases, it is. And that one really, I think that just exceeded everyone's expectations. And we already, as I said at the outset, we were expecting a fantastic match, but we got more than we could ever have envisioned.
Yeah, Steve, you made just some incredible points, and I love the passion with which you talk about tennis and these matches. In looking at your book and the matches in your book and discussing these matches, one common thread that these matches have is, well, some of them for sure transcend the sport. They bleed over into non-tennis fans, and I think this particular match, like the Rafa Roger match,
yes,
like the McEnroe Borg match, they get into, I don't know if the word is zeitgeist, but they get into kind of the cultural, and it takes years to do that. But for some reason, this match between Carlos and Jannik kind of feels like it's there, like it did it. It just happened. And it's incredible.
Yeah, you're right. And you're touching on something important. I think it drew in the general sports fan who was flicking the dial, and maybe they picked up this match at a set all. Picked it up in the middle of the third set with Sinner up 2 sets and thinking, well, maybe I should watch the third and see if he wins it. But I have a feeling most of those people who were only planning to sit there for another 45 minutes watched it the rest of the way, because it was too gripping to unless you had some kind of an unavoidable plan and dinner plans or whatever it was, you weren't going to leave your set. And I heard a lot of talk like that from very casual sports fans. A friend of mine sent me a text talking about how, and he loves tennis and he loves Rafa, but he doesn't. Yes, he'll watch a lot of the major finals and he might comment and maybe he'll watch part of it, maybe he'll watch all of it, but his heart isn't necessarily in it entirely. He enjoys it, but it's as I say, it's a casual attraction to him. But this one, I got this text, and he just was completely bowled over by that match. And he didn't have while he had always been a Nadal fan, it didn't sound to me from his text that he didn't say, oh, I was so sorry Sinner lost, or I was so happy Alcaraz won. It was neither. He just was completely knocked out by the match, by the contest, by both players. So, and by the way, the other thing you have to say about that match, Sinner was not the crowd favorite, even though they appreciated him. It was right. Pretty overwhelming for Carlos, who has this ability. He's just such a magnetic performer, and he connects with the crowd. He reaches out to them. He urges them on with his gestures, and in a way that I think is perfectly fine, by the way. I don't want to make that sound like I think it's not devious, but it's his nature to be expressive, to be demonstrative, and to reach out to crowds and try to gain their support, to let them know he almost needs their support. Sinner doesn't do nearly as much of that. He does the occasional fist pump. But that's, to me, what made it all the more poignant, the way Sinner handled the whole thing and did his usual hug of Carlos when it was over, and didn't seem to be feeling sorry for himself. And yet, since then, after the tournament and his first interviews back, he did admit that he had a lot of sleepless nights after this match. But I think that's a good sign. I think at that level, if you didn't react that way at his level, something would be wrong. Because you're now the best player in the world. You're trying to become one of the best of all time. You're going to have this ongoing rivalry with Alcaraz where you both should get. It's impossible to imagine they're both not going to end up minimum somewhere in that 15 to 17 Grand Slam title range. Whether they can approach Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, we don't know that yet. That's still asking a lot, but they're certainly going to go deep into the double digits. And Sinner has a lot of pride, and I think he'd like to feel that one day he'll come out ahead of Carlos on that list. But he's just wants to figure out at this point, what does it take from me to finish off Carlos? Because he keeps coming. This is not the first time. In that 5-match streak, all but one of them, he won the first set. And in this league, as you know, Adam, whether it's best of 3 or best of 5, the winner of the first set is. The stats are so overwhelmingly in that player's favor to go on and win the match, because even in best of 5, the other guy's going to have to win 3 of the next 4 sets. It's a tall task. It's not easy to do. So Sinner, I think, is trying to figure that out in his mind. What does it take for me to overcome Carlos on these big occasions? Because I'm giving it everything I have. I'm thinking about it so much. And he even said once last fall, after they played in China, that there's nothing he thinks about more than what he needs to do to beat Alcaraz. And he doesn't mean it in a personal way. It's all about tennis and what it takes, what he needs to do between the lines. So I think it's a fascinating situation, because none of these have been routes. And even in Rome, he had 2 set points in the first set, and that was his first tournament back. And after the suspension. So that you can't keep having these opportunities and building these leads if you're not good enough to beat the other guy. And even Alcaraz mentioned in his press comments that he's not going to go on beating him forever. And that was his way of saying, he's too good. There were times out there today that I felt helpless. And what he's saying is, I can't expect to beat him every time out. But the last 5 times it's gone his way. And I do think that will change. And I think we'll get back to seeing Alcaraz wins 2, Sinner wins 3, Alcaraz wins 2, Sinner wins 4, and where there are stretches where each one dominates, but the other strikes back. And I'm rooting for that too, because I think that we have 10 years to look forward to it. There should be 10 more really good years of watching these two guys meet, and where most of the meetings, if not all, will be finals.
Well, we're on the same page with the matches you brought up, particularly 2 of the 3 matches you brought up, because you touched on it already, but the McEnroe, this is the Never Better Sports Illustrated cover, Wimbledon winner John McEnroe.
And what year? I can't see the.
This is July 11th, 1983. July
Okay.
11th, and then just this beautiful picture here of when Borg wins his 5th straight Wimbledon.
Yeah, nice.
Bjorn the Invincible.
Yeah, that's the McEnroe match. Yeah, and the '83 one, by the way, Adam, that was an interesting one because McEnroe ended up. That was the least memorable of his finals because he destroyed Chris Lewis in the final.
Right.
Curran had a couple of big wins. He'd beaten Connors and McEnroe. He'd beaten Connors, and he'd had a great tournament. And that would have been an interesting final because a couple of years later he did beat McEnroe and Connors again. So, but Chris Lewis slipped into the final, which was a nice story, a terrific story that he got there. But McEnroe was sublime that day and destroyed Chris Lewis. So that was his 2nd title. He had won it in '81 and then lost to Connors in the '82 final, and now he got his title back in '83.
And then you brought up this is the iconic cover of the tennis epic, considered the greatest. Many consider this to be the greatest match of all time. This is that incredible, Roger Rafael. And while I want to get further on in the Wimbledon preview, just real quick, couple of takeaways. The Borg McEnroe match, so fascinating because after Borg loses or McEnroe wins the tiebreaker 18-16. I remember McEnroe saying in an interview he thought the match was pretty much over. I mean, how could anyone come back after that? And of course, Borg did. Then, as you said, Borg next year lost the title to McEnroe and lost U.S. Open, and then just walked out the door and said, instead of taking the Sinner approach of, I want to get better to beat McEnroe, there are a lot of other factors, I'm sure, and this just takes nothing away from one of the greatest players that we'll ever see. And he has a new book coming out, so we'll see what he has to say about it. But it's interesting. Borg's approach was, I'm not going to beat this guy. And as you pointed out in the book, that was a miscalculation because for whatever reason, Mac went down. Now, Mac may have gone down because of the symbiotic. You said, well, maybe Mac lost something because he lost a piece of himself in that rivalry. There was so much tied up in beating Borg.
Yeah, he said that, Adam. I think I think it's the most commendable side of McEnroe. The way he genuinely looked at that period and how he felt. And instead of saying to myself, he could have taken the attitude, it was fun playing Bjorn, but I don't need that anymore. After titles, and he's tough to beat. And I beat him. I did win these last 3 major finals against him, but I don't want to worry about him anymore. He's a great guy, but I don't want to look across the net at him anymore. But he had the exact opposite feeling of loss and remorse because he loved the rivalry and he loved the challenge, and he didn't want Borg away from the scene. So that really bothered him. Yeah, it was a miscalculation. That's exactly the word I used in the book. And but secondly, the second part of this was that Borg was burnt out too. It was so he just couldn't bring himself. He sort of got away from the training, and it just became too tough. And then he ended up having a fight with the authorities not long after that about committing to 10 tournaments outside the slams. That he didn't want to be told when and where to play.
Right.
Got defiant about it, which again, the younger Bjorn would have just said, "Oh, you want me to play those tournaments? Fine." But now he just something had snapped a bit, and that was too bad because we did lose out, and he's 25 years old, and conceivably they could have been playing for 5 more years. And what Bjorn must have really I wonder what he thought the next year when he saw John losing to Jimmy in the epic Wimbledon final and John losing to Lendl in the U.S. Open semis and Jimmy winning both tournaments. And he had owned Jimmy right up till the end, those last 4 years. Starting, basically turning point was the 77 Wimbledon final that Bjorn won in 5. Until then, Jimmy had dominated him through the 76 Open. But I wonder what he thought when he saw it was Connors taking the 2 biggest prizes in 82, and deservedly so, but wondering, what if I'd stayed around? I mean, John was not as good in 82 as he was in 81. And part of it may well have been just his disappointment and sadness over the absence of Borg.
Yeah, one of the things I love about the book is you don't just talk about the match in a vacuum. You do a prologue where you kind of introduce us to all the factors going into this match, what this match was going to mean to each player, and then an epilogue where you kind of summarize what happened to each player and what it meant. And what makes these matches so great is they do have an important place in tennis history. They don't exist in a vacuum. They affect people's lives. McEnroe, his book, he talks about waking up and screaming about losing the French Open final to Lendl, and I have a feeling that fortunately Jannik Sinner is going to be thinking about those 3 match points, but it's going to propel him.
Yes, because it will, and that was really his only big chance to win the French,
mm-hmm.
and he knew it. And then he never got anywhere near that close again. A part of him probably realized that was maybe a one-time deal. Sinner is so young. It's really hard for me to imagine that Jannik, who's already won the U.S. Open and a couple of Australian Opens now, that he's not going to go on and win the French and win Wimbledon and be get a career
right.
Grand Slam out of it. And he's so young that I think I'm glad it happened to him when it did, because there's so many big years ahead of him that I don't think that it will play out the same. Just one quick comment, though. You mentioned, I just wanted to say, you were talking about Bjorn, and John figured he must be in the driver's seat and he's going to win this match.
Yes.
After the tiebreak. I mean, surely a part of Rafa felt that way when Roger won the 4-set tiebreak in their Wimbledon final in 08, because Rafa had been up 2 sets with a love 40 opportunity in the middle of the third, then the 5-2 in the tiebreak, and eventually serving, and a double fault got tight, and 2 match points later, unable to convert. Great backhand pass from Roger. And so we go into the 5th, and the crowd's exhilarated, and Federer is revitalized. And I'm sure a part of Rafa thought to himself, you may have blown it. It might be over. But then there's the famous story about Uncle Tony in the rain break in the 5th going in to see him. And Rafa saying, no. Uncle Tony was worried about Rafa and for Rafa. But Rafa's basic message was, he may beat me, but I'm not going to lose.
Yeah, that's classic. Obviously, Rafa. That match is subject of a documentary in which, that was discussed. But what I do, that match, Federer had gotten thumped by Rafa in the French, if I recall.
Oh, of course.
I think he got bageled in the last
He did.
set.
It was a 1-3. It was a 1-3 in love.
Yeah, and there was so much. You talk about a prologue. There was so much writing on that match, and he goes down 2 sets to love in Rogers' house, and if I recall, and this is Miami Open related, but I think that Roger had come back from 2 sets to love against Rafa. I think at one point at the Miami Open.
Yeah,
okay. So
Miami.
I have no idea if that entered Rafa's head, but that match, obviously you picked these matches for a reason. That match it's epic, and the other thing, it's interesting what these matches have in common is you get to know a little bit about the soul of a player, what they're made of, and as sometimes these post-match ceremonies are strange with dancers and singers, and thankfully Not with the majors. That thankfully they're more dignified, and you really kind of can get a better handle on it. And watching the interaction, Sinner, unbelievable that he held it together and how gallant, as you put it, he was. Um, very often, Rafa comforting Roger and vice versa. Um, it brings a humanity. Like these are people. They're people who are going through one of the most difficult moments of their lives. Really, it's that they've lived their whole life for this moment, and it's nice. Excuse me, nice to see when they're able to bring the competitive. Whereas McEnroe, that match meant a lot. McEnroe did not like Lendl. Lendl did not like McEnroe.
Right.
McEnroe was in control of that French Open. He was having a season of a lifetime, crushing. So, but anyway, it's interesting. Anybody who watches tennis, go ahead. Sorry, Steve.
No, sorry, you're just making me think of this. The other thing we learn about these great men is that they're human beings. I mean, you made the reference to Sinner. Sinner, he didn't quite come out and say it, but I think a part of him feels that he choked. Now, does he feel like he just completely threw the match away? No. But you look back on those big moments and the match points, and I think they're honest with themselves, and they accept that can happen to them, but it also can happen to their opponent. And sometimes you can overcome it to the point where you got tight in a certain moment that could have cost you the match earlier, but you find a way later to get the job done. But I remember that. I remember there was a really interesting moment back in 2000 where Pete Sampras is playing Guga Kjartan, and there's a lot of South American fans. It's in Miami Open final, and Pete had served for a 2-set lead, and Guga got back into the match, broke him, and they go to a 4-set tiebreak, and Sampras is 6-2 in the tiebreak out of it. Took him 7 match points to get it done. And Bud Collins asked Pete about one of the match points, and we tried to find a delicate way to put it, but it was like, so what happened? What was going on there, Pete? He said, "Oh, I choked, Bud. We all choke." And I thought that was a great response from Sampras. Somebody as great as him to acknowledge it, and I think Sinner would too. But he also will balance it with the help of his coaches and his family and his own inner voice by saying, but I played some fantastic tennis. Carlos did too. I was a part of something larger than myself. And I almost took it back again. Even though I feel I should have won in the 4-set, I almost got it back in the 5th. So look, I'm not going to beat myself up over this because Carlos was phenomenal. And I was right there with him every step of the way. And with a little bit of luck, I would have been holding the winner's trophy. So there's a lot for them to reflect on later. But I think the best part of these all-time greats is no matter what they might say to us as reporters, and they have a right to hold back a bit, and they're coming in not long after the matches, I believe that they're extremely honest with themselves about what happened.
Right. And I listen, jumping around here, I'm a big Sabalenka fan. She's on our cover. Her comments after losing to Coco were regrettable. She has apologized. But we learned a little bit. We learned, obviously there's a huge fire that burns inside her, and she's not perfect, and she's not always going to say the right thing. We also learned about Coco. She was very gracious in understanding, hey, she's a competitor. I know she, said it in the heat of the moment, and that's important. And we also learned.
Coco, you are so right. That's gotten lost a bit in this story, and I'm glad you brought it up because the emphasis has been on Sabalenka and her lack of grace and her bitterness and defeat and her using the conditions as an excuse and shortchanging Coco. But Coco did not return the favor, and it showed a lot of class. It would have been easy for her to kind of fire back. She didn't do it because a part of her understood the angst and frustration in Sabalenka, and she just said, that's okay. I get it. I understand it. But that showed tremendous class on Coco's part. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, class, grace, maturity. Anybody who's had any contact with her on the media side or even off the media side, just a delightful young woman whose parents are awesome, and just she gets it. She gets it.
She also was able to say to herself, look, you got through this. You won this. you don't need to worry about the fact that Sabalenka is distraught and saying things that she might later regret. You know what you did to win this. You know that you earned it. Forget about it. Let her vent. It's okay. That's how Coco looked at it.
It's funny. I had Katrina Adams on the podcast the other day, and her book really is interesting, and it starts out with her walking towards the trophy ceremony between Serena and Osaka, but not, it's called Only Arena, by the way, uh, but not really knowing what was happening until, she's hearing the boos and everything. And the postscript of that whole thing was Serena reaching out to Naomi Osaka and telling her, I pretty much I love you and I'm sorry the moment got taken. And Osaka saying, I get it, I understand, it's all good. And Katrina being all part of that. And it's nice to see, when that happens because it's emotional, it's tough. And the other thing I wanted to say about that is there's a little too much access to players. Listen, I know for a media person to say this, but don't put that camera inside the exercise room necessarily and inside a room when the player doesn't know, when Sabalenka broke that racket and everyone's watching it and it's in the locker room, that's a private moment. When they're at the changeover is, I know it's all about TV, but the changeover is you got to get your thoughts together and that camera's in your face. And I know it's.
Yeah, but Adam, the changeover is a little different. I completely agree with you about the locker room. There should be privacy there, but you kind of know you're out there in the public spectrum and you're aware of it and it's a given. But when you're in the locker room, you kind of think you're back in your living room. You're back in your private quarters. So they ought to be able to stop that. I do sympathize. It's not easy for them. It's just that Sabalenka seemed to forget, unfortunately, that those conditions were not easy for Coco either. There were two players on that court.
Well, you mentioned one of my all-time favorites, Pete Sampras, and it's your great book, Greatness Revisited. And then I did bring this out because it says Pete Sampras, Pistol Pete, Wimbledon King, Pete Sampras, and this is July 11th, 1994. And it's a 9. We're getting closer. We want to get to that 10.
94, you said?
This is July 11th, 1994.
Yeah, that was, of course, when he defended his title. That was his second of what would be 3 in a row. And then he lost in 96 and won 4 more in a row. But that was a match when we talked about it in the book. I think he felt that was really one of his best performances when he beat Ivanisevic 2 tiebreakers and then 6-love in the third in the final. And it was so tough for him to play Goran and such a fearsome server. And he was very proud of that performance and because we talked at great length about how that matchup is kind of a lot of fans didn't understand what it took for them to beat each other. 2 big servers confronting each other on the center court on a fast grass court on a warm day. And I think that win in 94 meant a lot to him.
Well, I'm going to ask you one other question about Sampras as we do our Wimbledon kind of discussion preview. And I think you can appreciate this. Darren Cahill said, Sampras, this was just the other day, Sampras played the score better than anybody. Now, I think I know what he meant, but what is that? How would you explain that, Steve, that Sampras played the score better than anybody?
He knew when to bear down. He knew how to pace himself through a match and when to really try to bring out his best stuff, when it was time to lift his game significantly to meet the moment. So that we saw it a lot. I think what he means is he would, it's 3-all in the first set and his opponent's at 40-love. Just take a cut at the next return, but don't take it too seriously. While, of course, the exact opposite philosophy was Rafa, who played every match point. So it's not that there's one formula that works for chess. I agree with Darren. For Pete, playing the score, understanding the score and the situation so well, that was the right way for him to play. And he knew that he was only going to need that one break or to win it in a tie break. So the same thing. He would not waste energy. What he would try to do is hold his own serve as quickly as possible, swing away at some of those returns. But if the other guy got ahead, just let that game go. Forget it. It's not important. Right. Get those balls back in your hand and start serving again. So I think he's giving him the credit he deserves for being a really highly intelligent match player. That's what Darren means.
Right. And I think it was Agassi who said that you'd play Pete even, and then there'd be a moment before you opened your eyes, you would blink and the set was over.
Yeah.
His level would just knew when to go. I'm taking the set now.
Yeah, Courier said the same thing to me in the book that Agassi late.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
And basically, their point of view was that up until 4-all, they felt like they'd been the better player. They were, and in a lot of cases, holding quite easily, but they were wary because they knew that Pete was going to make his move. If it got to 4-all, 5-all, that's when he was going to suddenly turn into a different player, and he was going to string some returns together, and he was going to secure that break and serve it out, and you never knew what hit you.
Yeah. Well, for the podcast listeners and watchers who wanted the Wimbledon preview, I'm going to give a few things, talk a little bit about Wimbledon 2025. It's Monday, June 30th to Sunday, July 13th, 2025. It's officially known as it's the world's oldest tournament, dating back to 1877. It's played on grass at London's All England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club in London. This year's tournament is the 138th to take place. I believe it's referred to as the championships. Right?
Right.
Now, who's won the most titles? Roger Federer has 8. Djokovic is at 7, tied with Pete. Of course, Djokovic is trying to get his 8th this year. Martina Navratilova has 9. Steffi Graf and Serena Williams have 7. Venus has 4. It's the only grass court major tournament of the tennis season. 2 of the Grand Slams are played on hard court. That's the Australian Open and the U.S. Open. 1 is on clay, the French Open, which we just talked about. And of course, you have Wimbledon on the grass. The grass court season is the shortest on the tour, starting after the French Open, culminating at Wimbledon. It's under 6 weeks long. Last year saw Carlos Alcaraz take the men's title for the second year in a row, beating Novak Djokovic. Barbara Krejcikova, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, she deserves it, beat Jasmine Paolini last year. Kind of emotional. She had been coached by the late, great Jana Novotny in the past. The draw is going to take place Friday, June 27th at 10 a.m. And the first round matches will start on Monday, June 30th, which leads me to Steve Flink. Why is Wimbledon so special?
It's never lost its luster because the players have always regarded it as the most prestigious tournament of them all. They respect the tradition. They respect the way it is run. I mean, I don't consider myself knowledgeable about horse racing, but no matter what they want to say about the Preakness or some of these other majors, it's the Kentucky Derby. Well, that's how Wimbledon is the Kentucky Derby of tennis. And I don't think that will ever change, which is why, and it's hard to say, is it the grass? Not necessarily. I think had Wimbledon somewhere along the line chosen to change servers, which they never were inclined to do, but let's just say hypothetically they had, I don't think that would have changed it. It's the name, it's the symbolism, it's the fact that it was the first big major played. I just feel in the 1870s. So I think it's any number of factors, but I think each generation of players that have come along have understood. I mean, Rafa understood as much as he cherished and valued those French Open wins. When he finally got that Wimbledon in 08 over Roger, it meant the world to him because he knew that, and he would admit it to this day. He had that big ceremony this year at Roland Garros to celebrate the 14 wins.
Sure.
Here, but he would tell you he knows that Wimbledon is a more important tournament. Now, Roland Garros is extremely important. All the Grand Slam events are, but Wimbledon is the preeminent event in tennis. Always has been, always will be.
Which you mentioned the grass, Steve, from your perspective. Can you talk about what you've observed in terms of playing on grass versus other surfaces? What makes grass so different? Pete Sampras obviously never won the French, and John McEnroe never won the French. And then you have, I'll just say it right now, you have these outlier, nothing, taking nothing away from, Tatiana Maria. She goes out at the Queen's Club. I think she's 37, two kids watching her play.
Right.
Two kids who can appreciate what she's doing. And she beats, I think, 4 top 20 players and wins a grass court tournament with a slicing a forehand and a backhand. So there's something different about grass, Steve. What is it?
Well, you just touched on it there, Adam. You definitely touched on it there. The low bounce is definitely the grass courts at Wimbledon are there's no doubt they're playing slower than they did in the days of Sampras, as an example. But you can't change the fact you still get a lot of low bounces. Slice is maybe more effective than on any other court. And it's slower now than it was. So maybe it's fairer in some ways. You could argue that it doesn't favor the big server as much, but you still have to deal with these low skidding bounces. You still got to get down lower to the ball, bend your knees more. There are different demands on the players. And I think they like it. And obviously there's just something, the aesthetics of it all, Adam, there's something beautiful about grass courts. I mean, think about how fortunate golf is with all these beautiful courses, people sitting in their living rooms looking at all that greenery. And it's got such an immense appeal. You can't help but appreciate it. And I think that's the case with Wimbledon too. But we would have said something different about grass 20, 30 years ago than now, since it got slower. But that what has not changed is that low bounce. I mean, for instance, a lot of people think that's the biggest issue Zverev has. So he hates the low bounces, and that's why so far he hasn't had the impact at Wimbledon that one would have thought for someone who's done so well in all the majors and been in the finals of the U.S. Open and the finals of the French. And with his big serve, you'd think he'd be terrific on grass, but he hasn't been thus far. So the low bounce stands out to me as one of the key. And Djokovic, of course, he's so good at getting down to the ball. I mean, his fundamentals are so sound, and that the court really. That's why it's come to suit him as much as any surface has. I mean, not in the early years of his career. He finally got on the board in 2011, and then had a few years where he lost to Roger the next year, and then he lost to Andy in the finals. Roger in the semi, Andy in the final. But then starting in 14 and 15 with the wins over Federer, you saw him getting more and more comfortable on those courts, and it wasn't entirely logical. That's what makes this era interesting, is that Djokovic, you wouldn't have thought of him as necessarily as a natural grass court player, although his return to serve is very beneficial on the court. But he groomed himself. He worked at it. Initially, I think he had played plenty on clay as a kid, and he loved hard. He became known as the quintessential hardcourt player. But eventually, I think this surface you could argue, is now his best. And since you look at that period I described, 2014 and 15, he wins. Okay, he lost to Query, which was a shocker in 16, and then had to retire against Burditch the next year. But starting in 18, he wins the top 18. Where he had an epic with Rafa in the semis, and then beat Anderson in the final. He wins it again in 19 in that epic over Roger. There's no tournament in 20, but he wins it in 21. He wins it in 22, and in the last 2 years, he's been in the finals against Carlos. So what a record he's had. Fantastic. And then you look at Alcaraz. Why does that surface suit him? That I find fascinating too. But Carlos is just so gifted. He has he's such versatility in his game. So touch and power. And somehow he seems to put more emphasis on his serve. He serves better on the grass, pulls out the big serve more often. There's a lot of things he does so well, to the point where you might argue now, at this stage of his career, after the last 2 years, and having not played as well at the Open since he won it in 22, that hard courts have become maybe his most vulnerable surface, and grass might be his best.
Well, for me, what ties in with the low bounce is obviously movement.
Yes. Yes.
There's a difference between moving on a hard court, obviously moving on red clay, and moving on grass. And the greatest players are somehow able to do that. I watched Carlos. So just getting into the Wimbledon prediction, Carlos Alcaraz is the favorite to win Wimbledon based on what you look at the analytics, etc. He beat Yuri Lehechka at the 500 at Queen's Club.
Right.
And a point for me that stood out was just Lehechka hit. It just looked like the perfect drop shot.
Yes.
And Carlos moved like he was shot out of a cannon. He didn't just get to the ball. He got to the ball, hit a tremendous shot, and then to really rub salt in the wounds, when Lehechka gets to the ball, he lobs over his head, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I watched this guy move on clay perfectly. Now I'm watching him move on grass like it's the same surface, but it's not.
That was a beautiful point. It got him back to 4-all in the second set tiebreak. He didn't win that tiebreak, but that point was the most memorable of the match. And I'm glad you brought it up because I still can see him in my mind's eye scampering forward 5-6 quick steps to get to the drop, to get it back cross court. Lehechka now steers his forehand down the line thinking it's going to be enough because Carlos has to retreat and go deep on his back inside, and somehow he puts up that perfect topspin lob. So he's an incredibly gifted athlete, and you're right. You're absolutely right. In addition to the low bounce, it's the footwork. It's different. Moving on that surface is different, and those that can adapt to that are the ones that are going to do the best on that court. And I'm not sure Zverev has ever moved as well on grass as he does on clay or hard either. Novak does. I think he'd actually prefer the footwork and movement on a grass court to clay. He has to work at it more on clay, but I think it's become natural to him on grass.
And then we had again on the men's side, Alexander Bublik comes out and beats Daniil Medvedev in Halle, Germany at the 500. A couple of things about that tournament. It didn't turn out for Sinner, obviously, the way he would have liked. But Medvedev, not that I don't want to talk about Bublik, but I'm a huge proponent of Medvedev, and I was concerned as you were that things weren't going well. But it was nice to see him show up to do well. I don't know how to analyze Bublik. I'll kind of turn that over to you. I'm not quite sure what to say.
I don't think he's quite sure, and Adam, and I don't think he's quite sure because he was admitting afterwards that he'd reached the point where he was almost ready to just put the racket down. He was so discouraged by his results in recent months, second half of last year and beginning of this year. And then, he went to a challenger and that sort of turned things around for him, and then had the great run at Roland Garros to the quarters, and now he wins this. No, he's a very unique player, and he somehow manages to keep the points pretty short, and he seems to take what look like to be impossible risks with his ground strokes, but he misses very little for someone who hits so big. And then he has this great serve, and then throw in the drop shot. I mean, we know that Carlos uses it. We know all the top players use it. Novak uses it. Carlos has maybe the best drop shot in the game. But Bublik's shot, it was dazzling what he did. He saved a set point with one of them today in the second set against Medvedev. No, he had an incredible week, which also included a win over Sinner.
Yeah, it didn't go. Yeah, I wasn't sure how to analyze that either.
That win?
Yeah.
Well, I thought, listen, he got beaten pretty badly by one close set out of 3 in the quarters of the French. But that's clay, and even though he'd done a great job to get to the quarters, big advantage to Sinner on clay. Here, I just thought, it was similar to Medvedev. It's almost impossible to break him. Sinner did it early, but he couldn't do it after the first set. And then, you lose your serve once and he makes you pay, which is what happened to Medvedev the first set today. And sometimes he can be unbreakable when he's serving this well. And he unnerves you because you don't know whether he's going to blast away or hit the drop shot. In that sense, It's the only similarity he has to Carlos. There's a lot of differences, but that's what drives players nuts playing Alcaraz when he's at his best, is you don't know if he's going to hit a 97-mile-an-hour forehand winner or just disguise it the last second and hit a drop shot winner. And Bublik is unpredictable as well that way. You don't know when he's going to go big shots or use the touch.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with Bublik, and I recently heard him interviewed. It was a comical podcast, but he kind of said something along the lines of, I don't worry about the results and let's not take this too seriously. But then I'm watching the guy sobbing. So I don't know if that was a defense mechanism. I don't know how you could do that for a living and not take, he wanted that big time.
You said it. It was a defense mechanism.
Okay.
It means a lot to him. You don't have that kind of an emotional reaction after a win like this when you don't care. He cares a lot. And he had never beaten Medvedev in 6 previous tries. So that, in his mind, that was in some ways as tough as beating Sinner, because he mentioned afterwards that Medvedev's style is very difficult because he knows that Daniel's going to put up that brick wall from the backcourt and it's going to take a lot to hit through it, which he did extremely well. I've rarely seen a player do what he did for 2 sets against Medvedev, where he can extract the errors early in rallies with flat, piercing ground strokes and not allow Medvedev to drag him into 20, 25, 30 stroke rallies. For the most part, he kept them short. And that was difficult for Daniel to deal with. He couldn't find a way to prolong the rally. So, Bublik has now gone to 30. So he's going to get a Wimbledon seeding. Might end up having to play one of those top 4 guys. Likely will, I guess, it could happen in the 3rd round. But let's see how the draw pans out. But I'm glad he got a seeding and he deserves it. What a run from Roland Garros. Nobody thought he had a chance to be in the quarters of the French, and now to win this title and beat both Sinner and Medvedev in a tough semi with Khachanov. Now, Daniel picked up a little confidence. You started this little segment here.
Yeah, I want to talk about him a little bit. Go ahead.
He got a little lift because he did beat Zverev. It was kind of like years gone by, because he had won 11 of the last 13 coming in against Zverev. So many of those matches were down to the wire, tight 3-set matches. And this was too. And even after 3 match points eluded him at 5-6 in the second set, and he got blitzed in the second set tiebreak, he came back to win the 3rd. That was a high quality match, a good win for him. I thought it might carry him past Bublik. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. He's very happy to have gotten to a final, to beat Zverev again. And he respects Bublik, but he hasn't won a title since Rome a couple of years ago. So that's been a long, difficult road for him. And I think psychologically he'd like to end that. So my feeling is, look, we've seen him in a couple of Wimbledon semis. Mm-hmm. He's, against Carlos, the last 2 years, he's lost to Carlos in the semis. If he can manage to get back to the semis again, I tip my hat to him, because I'm current for his seeding. I think he's now 9. He went up to 9 in the rankings. I looked at that earlier. So most likely that's where he'll be seated.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Ruud just pulled out. We'll have to see what happens there. But that's going to be a disadvantage too, because the last couple of Wimbledons, he was seated much higher. And that helped him as well. And I'll be very impressed if he but to me, the real test, just to get back to your point, and you like him, and there's a lot I admire in him too, is going to be what we see from him on his favorite surface, the hard courts post Wimbledon. Let's just say he doesn't have a good Wimbledon, he loses in the 4th round. That won't be the end of the world. But what he's going to need to do is get out there in Canada and Cincinnati, US Open, and the fall, and show us his best stuff on hard courts and try to start posting some more Medvedev-like results to sort of push himself back toward the top 5 in the world, which is where he believes he belongs.
You made a great point about Daniil Medvedev recently not getting enough free points off his serve.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a shoulder situation, but that's a definite, it's noticeable. That's a guy that was a big weapon. And
I will say this, I did make that point, but I was somewhat encouraged by what I saw in Halle back on the grass. I thought a few more, and he wasn't getting broken much. And even today against Bublik, this one break, He hadn't lost his serve before he played Zverev, and Zverev got him a couple of times, once today. And I did see slightly better serving, not vintage Medvedev serving, but moving in the right direction is how I would put it.
Yeah, I hate to keep going back to Carlos, but why not? He hit a serve today that nobody talked about that hit short in the box against Lehechka and just left the court. And I thought, is he that good that doesn't even warrant a comment? I mean, I'm watching that serve like it was just an easy hits the box, left the court. And
yeah, because it's lands so short, as you said, it's a heavy.
Yeah.
When he locates that serve where he wants it in the ad court, it's a nightmare for everyone, including Novak. It's just because it's almost. This is where I get a little upset with people getting obsessed with the service clock numbers, because that kind of serve is not going to be measured. You're not going to see that at 125 or nothing like it, but it's probably even a more difficult serve to handle because of where it lands and how it bounds up high and away from you, and you have almost no chance to do anything with it.
It's a great point, Steve. So real quick, I'll go the order of seedings. I do have the seedings, at least looks like the order of seedings. It said Wimbledon 2025. Sinner number 1, Alcaraz number 2, Zverev 3, Jack Draper 4, Taylor Fritz 5, Djokovic is at 6, Lorenzo Musetti at 7, Holger Rune at 8, Daniil Medvedev at 9. Rounding out the top 10 would be Ben Shelton, but there's so much talent beyond that. Demonauer, Tiafoe, Tommy Paul, Rublev, Jakub Mensik, who I watched up close and personal take it to Djokovic in Miami Open, and it goes on and on. Dimitrov is in there, and Bublik, of course, coming off that win. Alex Mickelson can do some damage, and then Matteo Berrettini is just sitting there at 32. So, you want to give any prediction, Steve, on who's going to successfully win Wimbledon this year?
All the players, a lot of those players you mentioned, they can cause trouble. They can go deep. To me, there's 3 really strong candidates and a pretty good backup fourth, because Carlos becomes, to me, after the last 2 years and this recent streak that he's on from Rome through Paris through Queens, biggest streak of his career. This is just going to make him even more confident going in.
Sure.
And he's not afraid to defend. He showed that last year. And
right.
He's the clear favorite to me. Sinner is a clear 2, despite losing to Bublik in Germany. I think he'll pick himself right back up. And we haven't seen Sinner's best at Wimbledon. But on the other hand, last year he was kind of sick when he played Medvedev and dizzy. And the year before, he lost to Novak in the semis. And the year before that, he had Djokovic down 2-0 before Novak came back and beat him. So he can play really well. I make him the clear thing. And then Novak, without a doubt in my mind, is the 3rd best chance to win this tournament.
Fascinating. So would you take those 3 guys against the field?
Well, yeah, I would. But the other guy I throw in as the 4th, but I put him a couple of notches behind Novak, because I think more could go wrong. But also the upside is enormous, is Jack Draper.
I thought you were going to say that. He's got the lefty serve going for him, hometown favorite.
Yeah, now he got a little uptight at Queens. He never played his best there, and he eventually lost to Lehechka 7-5 in the 3rd in the semis, which was too bad, by the way, because it deprived us of a Carlos Draper final. Draper beat him there last year at Queens. It's hard to predict how it's all going to unfold with Jack Draper, in the sense that if he's as tight as he was at Queens, and you could see, and even started behaving a little less well than he normally does. He got a little too emotive at times, and I can see it means so much to him right now, Adam, to do well. And he's such a conscientious, such a top of the line professional, and his game is really well suited to grass. So I feel like I'm hoping that we're going to see Draper embrace the crowds, use it to his full advantage, and not have to get burdened. And I think, depending on the draw, if he can just get himself in the right state of mind, nobody's going to enjoy playing him, including those 3 guys. It's not going to be any fun for anybody, because the crowds are going to be so fervently behind Draper. And because he has the kind of game that translates so well to grass. And he's also improved so much. It's just not an accident. He didn't just get to number 4 by luck. He's earned it.
Well, I'd like to think Andy Murray's going to help Jack through that a little bit. They're fairly tight, and Andy felt that pressure of trying to win it after Fred Perry. I know Virginia Wade won it, but I'm on the men's side. It's nice to see.
Well, but Virginia Wade's a good example of how the crowds manifest themselves, because year after year, poor Virginia would be almost a bit overwhelmed. It became a negative because they would groan, and if she double faulted, they just couldn't hold themselves back. They wanted her to win so badly, and she could feel it, and she didn't want to disappoint them, which is why 1977 was so spectacular for her. A little different with Andy. The sense of the noise and the way they support him, there are some differences, but look how well he ended up doing to handle the moment of beating Novak in the finals in 2013, and to come back and win it a second time in 2016. And again, Murray, and that was after the deep disappointment of losing the 2012 final to Roger, where he was pretty tearful afterwards. But he got over that and came back and won it the next year in 13 and got another one 3 years later. So Murray could give Draper a lot of good advice, and I suspect he will. I think he'll want to be as helpful as he can to make Jack feel comfortable about it and make Jack realize that this is for you. Don't let it get in your way. They want you to win. Let them propel you. And watching Draper winning Indian Wells and getting to the final on the clay in Spain, and he's just made such immense strides as a player off the ground now too. His backhand is so solid now, and the forehand is one of the biggest in the sport. And yet there are times when he's a bit streaky off the ground, but he's just technically a much better player than he was even last year when he made the semis of the U.S. Open and lost to Sinner. I feel like since then, to me, he's 12 to 15% better. So I can't take him off my list of winners, but I'd be shocked if anyone other than those 4 won. I want to see how the draw plays out. In the case of Djokovic, I think it would help him if depending on which half he's on. If he didn't have to play both Sinner and Alcaraz physically, that's such a tough test for him.
Sure.
Because it inevitably, whichever one he beat would take an awful lot out of him if it was a semi, let's say, to have to come back and which I think was in the back of his mind when he lost to Sinner at Roland Garros in the semis. As he knew when he was down 2 sets and fighting and had those set points in the third set, if I come all the way back, I mean, in the back of his mind, he has to be thinking, if I'm somehow able to make a spectacular comeback and win, I'm going to be a physical wreck for the final. And that's the challenge he faces at Wimbledon. A little less so because of the courts and the surface. But if somehow one of them got picked off and he could move through the draw in his app and then only have to meet one of them, and oddly, I would say the preference might be Alcaraz, because Sinner since the end of 23, I mean, they had a bunch of matches at the end of 23, and they played twice at the year-end championships, and Sinner won in the round robin, and Novak won the final easily. And then Sinner came from triple match point down to beat Djokovic in Davis Cup, and that carried right over to that Australian Open win last year, to China in the fall, and to Roland Garros. So in the last bunch of matches, he's really had the upper hand, and Novak does not. He seems to have more trouble returning against Sinner than he does against Alcaraz. He just can't. He got one break in Paris, but he is. Most of these matches, he's just having trouble breaking him at all. So that matchup to me at this point is more worrisome for him. While with Alcaraz, he comes back from the Wimbledon loss last year, beats Carlos in 2 tiebreaks to win and people said, well, best of 3, but it was a very long 2 sets. And he won them both in tiebreaks for the Olympic gold, and comes back and beats him again in Australia this year in the quarters. So I think that matchup is just more comfortable. It doesn't mean he's going to necessarily win, but
sure,
his chances are more favorable. So ideally, he would. The scenario for him might be somehow Sinner gets picked off by somebody. Maybe he loses to a Bublik, and Djokovic is able to get through on his half and get a third crack at Carlos in the final. That might be his best chance. But I think he's going to be very inspired, because let's face it, he knows. No matter how much he talks at him about the Olympics coming up, the next Olympics, how he wants to go back, he realizes he's not going to be. I can't see him accepting another year at the majors, even as remarkable as it is, where this year he's been in the semis of the two majors. The first time he had to retire against Zverev. Those are pretty decent showings for most people. That's not his standard. So my point being, if he didn't win Wimbledon and he doesn't win the Open, it's hard for me to see him move on to the majors next year and accept that as the new standard and just keep going so that he can then try to defend his Olympic title in 28. I have a hard time seeing that happening. I think so. My hunch is that if he doesn't get one of these next two, but I still think he's got a shot, and even if he does win one of the next two, either way, I think there's a reasonable chance he would say at the end of this year that it's enough.
Sure.
He's 38 years old. He's done it all, and I don't think as I say, I don't think he wants to accept going from the semis and then maybe starting to lose in the quarters, and that's just I don't see how that could be any fun for him.
For the podcast viewers and listeners, it is difficult it's a big ask for Steve to pick the winners when you're not looking at the draw. So thank you, Steve. It's not that easy to do. You really want to look at the draw. It makes a huge difference. But
yeah, you do. But yeah. I think all things being equal, I still would say, without even looking at the draw, the most likely scenario is Alcaraz. But there's a lot of possibilities here. We don't know. It's the first time he's going to go back anywhere as a two-time defending champion. I mean, it starts getting tougher and tougher to protect your turf like that. And he's got a great attitude and a great disposition, but who knows? I mean, last year Tiafoe had him in trouble, and he escaped and won that in 5. And there have been some tough matches along the way, and I would be particularly interested to see Alcaraz. The match I would most like to see at this year's Wimbledon would be an Alcaraz Draper, say quarter. Now it wouldn't be a quarterfinal; it'd be a semifinal because the most likely seeded 1 and 4. So that semi I would love to see.
Well, let's talk about the country we love, America. Let's talk about the Americans real quick. Taylor Fritz at 5, Shelton at 10, Frances Tiafoe at 12, Tommy Paul at 13, Brandon Nakashima at 29, Alex Mickelson at 30. And if I missed any Americans in this list, I am sorry. Tell me, Steve, which Americans do you like to make a deep run? Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the American players at Wimbledon.
Yeah, I mean, Tiafoe, as I mentioned, had almost pulled up a big upset over Carlos last year. That would have been terrific for him, and he just ended up playing. He was up 2-1, and he didn't play a good tiebreak in the 4th, and Carlos got him in the 5th. But so I remember him being Tsitsipas at Wimbledon years ago too. He loves playing the big guys. The question is, can he navigate the early rounds? U.S. Open, he plays well every year. I'm not as sure of him on grass, but he had a great French. So that's going to give him confidence coming in here. Fritz, he won a title on the grass. He beat Zverev in the finals. Then he lost early last week. Now he's back out again. He's playing another tournament this week. He's a workhorse.
Yeah.
Got to the quarters last year. I think that could happen again. I'd be surprised to see him despite his seeding. I don't expect to see him in the semis. But I don't want to sell him short. He's a complete pro, and he's got a game well suited to the grass with his big serve and his ground game. The problem is, to me, with Taylor, is the area of the game where he has the least faith in himself that could come in most prominently on grass is the volley. He's so hesitant about coming forward, and I think on grass you need to do that. Shelton has the biggest upside of all the Americans you mentioned. Tommy Paul, by the way, played well there last year and gave Carlos a nice match with Carlos. And Tommy, again, 4th round quarters, very possible. Ben is the one that could make a shock appearance and a surge into the semis and give somebody a scare. Because obviously with that left-handed serve on grass, different. I don't want to say he's just like Draper, but it's a similar advantage. Big left-handed serve. Ground game has improved a lot. Played a fantastic match against Carlos in the French. Really acquitted himself well there. And likes the idea of being a top 10 player now. Wants to live up to that billing. I could see as a surprise semifinalist. While the other guys, the Fritz in the quarters, Tiafoe and Paul. I mean, obviously, Francis is one of those guys who could go on a run, but I don't see him going past the quarters. And same with Tommy. The one with the best chance to be a surprise semifinalist is Ben Shelton.
Because of the lefty serve, right? In part?
Yeah, mainly because of the lefty serve. And just the all-around athletic ability, too. But the serve is the chief reason why.
Well, we're going to close the show, Steve, by going through analysis of the ladies, women's finals.
Sure.
Women's Wimbledon. We've got Aryna Sabalenka appears to be the favorite on paper from what I've read and garnered here. We'll talk about that in a minute. As I said, the most recent grass court 500 winners were Tatiana Maria over Amanda Anisimova, Marketa Vondrousova over Xinyu Wang, and at a Nottingham 500, 250, Nottingham 250, not to be overlooked, American McCartney Kessler over Diana Yastremska, which essentially meant that McCartney is number 32, seeded number 32. So I'm curious, your picks on the women's side, Steve.
No, it's so much easier to try to analyze the men because of because the top players are so reliable, incredibly reliable. Sinner and Alcaraz, I mean, they won every major between them going the beginning of last year. Novak is still consistently in the semis, and which is why I think he may well have one more in him if things can break the right way. Draper is now becoming very consistent. I mean, yes, he didn't do as well as he wanted at Queens, but he was in the semis. He happened to run into a top flight Bublik in Paris, so he lost that match. But he's just playing so well week in, week out but the women are at this point less predictable. It makes it every bit as interesting because you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, Rybakina's in better form again. Vondrousova winning the title today. You know, she hadn't won a tournament since she won her Wimbledon. And I'm encouraged by her. And again, left-hander on grass, nice advantage. Rybakina played well in Paris and really pushed Iga to the hilt. And she was up at 6-1-2 love and eventually lost in 3, but 7-5 in the third, but played really well. And she's on her way back to the top of her game. You alluded to Sabalenka. Yes, you have to make Sabalenka the favorite.
Okay.
However, on the flip side of the coin is the fact that since she won the U.S. Open last year, she's lost 2 bruising Grand Slam finals in a row. It's not just the one to Coco in Paris, but the Madison Keys loss was a very hard-fought match.
Madison Keys. We love Madison Keys, one in the Australian. So as Katrina Adams said last podcast, Aryna does not want to see an American lady in another major final.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't. Very timely for you to put that image up on the screen.
Yeah.
I mean, all things being equal, again, I would say Sabalenka is the best choice, but she pulled out an incredible match against Rybakina from 6-2 down in the tie in the third set, and then lost to Vondrousova. So she's consistently in the latter stages. She's been in the finals of the last 2 majors, won the U.S. Open last year. So she's always there in the latter stages, and she's more poised. Despite what happened in Paris, on balance, she's more poised than she used to be. That was a little bit of a retreat, I thought, on her part to behave that way because she's been less high-strung. She's been more sure of herself and her status in the last year. And she's added elements to her game. She got much more feel and touch, and the drop shot comes into play now, which can help her at Wimbledon. My worry about her is I still see her getting to the semis or finals again, and somebody just noses her out in 3 sets, and it won't necessarily be one of the Americans. There's others that could do it. It could be Rybakina who almost beat her. It could be Vondrousova who did beat her. So yes, I make her the most likely to succeed, but I think it's kind of wide open. Coco has not yet shown me on the grass that she's entirely comfortable, despite the fact that we think of her for her big win years ago in 19 against Venus. I mean, on given days, yes, and she can play great on it, but I don't think she trusts herself the way she does. I think she trusts herself almost equally well on hard courts and clay. And that's why she won this French, and she's been in another final in the French, lost to Iga a few years ago. She loves the clay. Obviously, she won the U.S. Open on hard, but I haven't seen the very best of Coco yet on grass. I almost feel that Madison, who has not had the results she might have wanted since Australia, but I think the surface suits her well, her serve, her game. I think maybe she's slightly more comfortable on that court.
Right.
But Gula's had a tough time lately. She just lost a marathon match this past week, a 3.5-hour match. She's had a knee brace on, but seemed to be moving well. And she's been in the quarters of Wimbledon, but I don't know if I can see her getting past the quarters. I'd love to be wrong, because Pegula to me is not. She's very underappreciated by both the public. I know, not by the fellow players. I would say by the public exclusively. They know what a pro she is, but I don't think they fully appreciate how good she is. The bottom line is the American women can make a dent in this tournament. Can any women, are we likely to have a champion? I don't think so. I'd like to be wrong on that one too.
Well, last year's winner, Barbara Krejcikova, is seeded 17. Jasmine Paolini, last year's finalist, is seeded number 4. So the top 10 seedings are Sabalenka, Coco Gauff, Jess Pegula, Jasmine Paolini, Qinwen Zheng, Madison Keys, Mira Andreeva, Iga Swiatek, Emma Navarro, Paula Badosa. But there's, you got Rybakina, sneaky Karolina Mukova.
Yeah.
Karolina Mukova, tremendous grass court specialist there.
Here we need, Adam, the benefit of the draw. You just mentioned a moment ago about the men and how it's a lot easier to make these projections if we have the draw. I think I need it even more with the women, but it's interesting. All those American women are seated near the top. I just think there's not one of them that you would say is more confident on grass than do they trust themselves on grass? Emma did beat Coco there last year, and as well as the Open, but she hasn't played as well recently. Pegula, as they say, seems to be nursing some type of an injury, although she moved well in her match. Madison has not had the results she would have liked, but she's got plenty of matches and had a good French. So my gut tells me that she might have the best chance of the Americans, that maybe she reaches a second season peak here. And it was very difficult for her. Now she's a little more under the radar, but for a while after everybody's expecting big things of her, she couldn't quite produce what she wanted and what they wanted. But I think probably she's settled into it. Now I think probably things are not spinning in her mind anymore. I think she's now has it in perspective and isn't going to be as worried about what the expectations of others or even herself. She's just going to go out and try and play. And she lost a heartbreaker to Paolini last year and got hurt. And I think she'll be anxious to make amends this year. So I guess looking at it without the benefit of the draw, she's the one I might single out among the Americans.
Interesting amount of, a good solid amount of Americans: Coco Gauff, Madison Keys, Emma Navarro.
And listen, maybe this.
And don't forget Sophia Kenin is out there too, and McCartney Kessler. I don't see Danielle Collins, honestly, and I don't know where.
But she has a game well suited to grass. She's so aggressive. In fairness to Coco, Adam, I do want to say,
please,
she has the mentality now. She's got her second major, which has to be a huge relief to her, because it isn't so much even that the fans were asking a lot of her and she was feeling pressure that way. I thought she was creating it for herself, which a lot of great players do. And I think Madison was doing that for a while, which I hope will cease now. But you start putting that burden on yourself and demanding it of yourself. Well, now that Coco grabbed that second major, which is always, I think, the most important one. Nobody wants to be in the one slam club. They want to validate it with a second one as soon as they can. Now she's got it. She had to wait a while. Hopefully she'll approach this Wimbledon differently than she has the last year or any other year, and perhaps be just quietly confident and able And if she's serving well enough, the thing that could change it all is if Coco's getting a decent first serve percentage. It's a very underrated first serve. She struggles sometimes with the second serve and doesn't double fault as much as she used to, but sometimes the second serve can let her down. First serve is highly underrated. So if she's got that percentage up and her forehand is firing well as it was in Paris, she had her forehand nicely under control there, good ball control off the forehand, then maybe she can make amends. I would like to believe that was possible.
Well, Steve, this has been incredible. So I'm going to ask you, where will you be enjoying Wimbledon this year? What's the plan for Steve Flink?
Well, I'll be watching the first week at home. I fly over on the Saturday, the 5th.
Love it.
And then I'll be on site starting on July 6th, the middle Sunday, for the last 8 days of play. So I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
Going back to 1965, I missed it in I was there every year from 65 to 73. I missed it when I started at World Tennis Magazine. I missed it in 74, 5, and 6. And then I was at everything from 77 through 2019. And I didn't go in 2021 because they weren't going to be able to guarantee us access to courts. It was still COVID restrictions. So I stayed home in 21, but I've been back there the last 3 years and be back there again this year. So I've had quite a long and happy history of going to Wimbledon.
Well, I want to wish you a safe and wonderful journey to Wimbledon. Have a great time. Can't thank you enough, Steve, for taking, first of all, this amount of time. You're so gracious to take this amount of time to talk to me. And on behalf of Florida Tennis, on behalf of me, Adam Ross, Florida Tennis, Bleacher Brothers Sports Network, this has been amazing, a thrill. It's just so great to talk to you and get your insights. I could keep this going for another 2 hours easily, but I want to save some for third serve or our next show. So Steve Flink, thank you, Hall of Famer Steve Flink, for taking the time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and have a great night, Steve.
Adam, thanks for having me on, and I look forward to the third serve. It's always enjoyable talking tennis with you.
Thank you, Steve.